These are the lecture notes for Chapter 7 on photosynthesis. We will cover all of the sections. There are 5 sections, as you can see here. We'll cover all of these sections. Basically, when you look at this, so the first section just gives you an overview of photosynthesis, and the most important thing in section 7.1 is to know which organisms are capable of photosynthesis, which organisms carry out photosynthesis to make their food. And then in section 7.2, there's an overview of photosynthesis of the entire process. 7.3 is the first part, because there are 2 stages or 2 parts of photosynthesis. One is called the light-dependent reactions, or the light reactions, and that would be section 7.3. And then the light-independent, or they've been called the dark reactions, but I don't like that one, because in the second section, the Calvin cycle reactions, or the light-independent reactions, can happen in the presence of light or darkness. So I don't like to call them the dark reactions. But basically, section 7.3 is the light reactions. 7.4, the reactions are called the Calvin cycle. And so we will go over those so that you understand what happens inside the plant cells. And then the last section is that there are plants that carry out photosynthesis in slightly different ways, and we'll talk about that, okay? All right, so section 7.1, all life on Earth depends on solar energy or sunlight. Some life depends on it directly. The photosynthetic organisms depend on sunlight directly because they have to capture sunlight in order to make their own food. But then all the other organisms that are heterotrophs still depend on solar energy, because it is the photosynthetic organisms that make the food for the rest of us heterotrophs, and also that provide oxygen in the air that we breathe. So let's see, what's highlighted here is the list of photosynthetic organisms: algae, plants, and cyanobacteria. So you remember that we learned about the 3 domains of living things, and we have the domain bacteria, the domain archaea, and the domain eukarya. So the algae and the plants are in the domain eukarya. The algae would be part of the kingdom Protista, the plants would be part of the kingdom Plantae. But the cyanobacteria are photosynthetic bacteria, so they are in the domain bacteria. So all of these organisms can carry out photosynthesis, and that means what they do is they transform solar energy or sunlight into chemical energy in the form of food, and that kind of food is called carbohydrates. A lot of times we oversimplify and say that it's glucose, but there are other forms of carbohydrates besides glucose, like starch, for example. Now, photosynthetic organisms are called autotrophs because they produce their own food. So they're autotrophs that produce their own food by the process of photosynthesis. And then move down to just to compare and make sure you understand the difference. Organisms that are not autotrophs, that don't produce their own food, are called heterotrophs or consumers. So animals would be heterotrophs, fungi would be heterotrophs. Of course, humans, because we're part of the animal kingdom, we are heterotrophs or consumers. All right, and so we depend on photosynthetic organisms for our food. Even if we don't directly eat the plants or the products that they produce, we eat other animals that eat plants. So, one way or another, we're all dependent on this process called photosynthesis. All right, so where in the plant does photosynthesis take place? It takes place basically anywhere in the plant that is green, which is going to be the leaves and sometimes part of the stem. The tissue where photosynthesis takes place in a leaf is called mesophyll tissue, and the organelle in eukaryotic organisms like plants and algae, the organelle that carries out photosynthesis is called a chloroplast. Now, the cyanobacteria don't have chloroplasts. They carry out photosynthesis within their cells. They do have pigment molecules, but they don't have, because they are prokaryotes, they don't have organelles like chloroplast and mitochondria. So, but chloroplast in eukaryotic cells, that is where photosynthesis takes place, is within the chloroplast. Now, photosynthesis uses carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and water. So in a plant, the water is absorbed through the roots, and the carbon dioxide comes in through pores in the leaf called stomata. And I should have highlighted that. It's right here in red. Stomata are pores in the leaf that take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen. And so that is how the raw materials are taken in by the plant, through the leaf and the roots. And here is a illustration of, here's your typical leaf. And what we're looking at is a cross section of the leaf. So this portion here at the top is kind of like if you took a leaf, tore it in half, and looked at the edge, So you're looking at the top part of the leaf, which is the cuticle, covered by a waxy cuticle for protection. You have the upper epidermis, and then on the bottom part, you have the lower epidermis, and that is where you will find these these pores called stomata. And you can see that carbon dioxide goes in and oxygen goes out through those stomata. But it is this tissue here, all of these cells that are lined up parallel to each other, and then even some of this tissue below that that's more irregular, is called mesophyll tissue. And all of these little green organelles are the chloroplasts.
Can I see?
Now, what you're looking at in picture B is the actual chloroplast that has been, the membrane has been cut away so you can see inside of it. So each one of these little green discs is called a thylakoid, and then the entire stack of disc is called a granum. So, and you can see that, I think they're labeled here. So each one of the green discs is a thylakoid, and a stack of green discs is called a granum. Then there is fluid that surrounds the grana, and that is called the stroma. So when we learn about the two stages of photosynthesis, the light reactions occur in the thylakoids, and then the Calvin cycle reactions occur in the stroma. Sorry, hold on. There we go. And this shows you the relationship between autotrophs and heterotrophs. The autotrophs, here you see the leaves of a tree, are capturing the solar energy, carrying out photosynthesis, and producing oxygen and glucose as byproducts. And then the glucose is actually used, it doesn't show this, but that glucose undergoes a process called cellular respiration. And when you look at this picture, I notice a lot of students have a misconception that cellular respiration only occurs in animals. But no, the glucose is also used partly in the same plant that produced it. The glucose will undergo cellular respiration in that same plant that produced the glucose. But it is also used by the animals that graze on the plants and eat the plants. Cellular respiration will break down that glucose into energy. And then the product of cellular respiration is carbon dioxide and water. That horse is going to breathe out carbon dioxide into the atmosphere along with all the other heterotrophs on the earth. And the water will just become a part of the horse. It will build up inside of the horse's body. But the water and the carbon dioxide are now going to be the reactants or the raw materials for photosynthesis in the plant. So this is just a cycle that goes on and on and on between autotrophs and heterotrophs. That would be part of the water cycle and part of the carbon cycle. Okay, now section 7.2 goes over photosynthesis, the entire process of photosynthesis. So The two parts of photosynthesis are the light reactions, which take place only in the presence of light. Sunlight would be ideal, would be the best type of light. And then the Calvin cycle reactions take place in the stroma of the chloroplast, and they can take place in the dark or the light. The thing about the Calvin cycle reactions is they don't need light to take place. Okay, so but let's go back up here and add something, if I can do it without making a mess, which I probably cannot, but I'm going to try. Light reactions take place only in the presence of light. Oh, here I can just circle this. Light reactions occur in the thylakoid of a chloroplast, whereas Calvin cycle reactions occur in the stroma of the chloroplast. Now, you've just learned two terms that sound a lot alike. The stomata, which also can be called stoma, are the pores in the leaf. The stroma, with an R in it, is the fluid inside of a chloroplast. So that's important to get that difference. All right, so thylakoids are where the light reactions occur, and the stroma is where the Calvin cycle reactions occur. Down at the bottom, this is a little bit about chemistry. Photosynthesis involves oxidation and reduction, which are chemical processes. Oxidation is the loss of electrons, and reduction is the gain of electrons. So both of those things happen during photosynthesis. The substance that is reduced, in other words, the substance that gains electrons, is carbon dioxide, and the substance that is oxidized or that loses electrons is water. You can also remember this to help you. Oil rig. Oil is oxidation is loss, and rig means, I didn't mean to do that. Rig means reduction is gain. Okay, so that's OILRIG, oil rig. Oxidation is loss, reduction is gain, and that will help you to remember that oxidation is loss of electrons, reduction is gain of electrons. Now, this is showing you, I'm just going to go to, well, okay, we'll go back to this. All right, an overview of photosynthesis as it occurs inside of the chloroplast. So you're seeing a chloroplast here, and you're seeing stacks of thylakoids or grana, and the thylakoids are the portion of the chloroplast that have the pigment chlorophyll. So the chlorophyll pigments absorb solar energy or sunlight, and during this process of the light reactions, a molecule of water is split, and it gives off hydrogen ions and oxygen. So this is where the oxygen comes from in photosynthesis, is from the splitting of water during the light reactions. Now, the products of the light reactions are two molecules, NADPH and ATP. They are both used by the Calvin cycle reactions. They're used to fuel or power the Calvin cycle reactions. So the NADPH, the ATP, are used by the Calvin cycle reactions, and which take place in the stroma of the chloroplast, and they convert carbon dioxide into CH2O, is just a representation of the formula for a glucose or a carbohydrate. So carbon dioxide is converted into a carbohydrate or food for the plant. Now, the sunlight energy has different wavelengths of light, and the wavelengths that are used by plants are in the visible light portion of the absorption spectrum. So pigments found in chlorophyll absorb various portions of visible light. And so there's other types of energy in the absorption spectrum, but visible light is what plants use, or what photosynthetic organisms use, is the visible light portion of the absorption spectrum. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, here's the entire electromagnetic spectrum, and it goes gamma rays, X rays,